got a Bible, go with me to Ezra chapter 5 and 6. So we got a lot of ground to cover this morning. As we jump in, here's our main idea. Renewal requires us to do more than expect opposition. And so we've been using that phrase over and over in this series, expect opposition, expect opposition. But renewal actually requires us, that's just the baseline, that's just where we start. But it actually requires us to do more than expect opposition. It invites us to embrace it as one of God's favorite tools to mature us. Now, as you read that second sentence, you're like, I don't think I'm gonna like this sermon. I don't want to embrace opposition, and I certainly don't want it to be God's method for maturing me, but yet somehow that's true, whether we like it or not, and I just want you to see the beauty of it this morning. So here's what I want to do. I want to recap where we've been just really briefly. I want to walk through chapters 5 and 6, and I want to begin to draw out some beauty of what the Lord is doing through the opposition that they're facing. So let's jump into a little bit of a recap. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned to you that there's this pattern that we see happening so far in the book of Ezra. And so here's what the pattern looks like. First, that leaders will start an initiative in alignment with their tradition, or even maybe better said, in alignment with what the Lord has called them to do. And as they do that, what keeps happening over and over again is that some level of opposition will show up. And when that opposition or unmet expectation shows up, then they have a choice that they have to make. Are they going to resolve to keep pushing forward, or are they going to retreat because it seems too difficult? And last week, as Capenna preached through chapter 4 felt like it was kind of a sliding doors type moment where the chronicler of Ezra was saying, hey, this keeps happening over and over again. It happened in the day of Cyrus, it happened in the day of Ahasuerus, and it happened again in the day of Artaxerxes. And over again, there's this pattern where opposition is going to come, and what are you going to do with it? In fact, the start of Capenna's text, verse 5 of chapter 4, actually is where our story will pick up. But what the chronicler was doing was, hey, see what happened back then is the same thing that's happening now. How are we going to respond to it? So even last week, we kind of left at the end of verse 24 of chapter 4 with this kind of anticlimactic, frustrating moment. Ezra 4:24 would say this: now the construction of God's house in Jerusalem had stopped and remained at a standstill until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. And so that's about 15 years from the end of that text to where we're going to be today. But just think about that. Like the one reason that they got sent back, the reason that they got permission from the government to do what they were doing was to build this thing. And now all of a sudden they're stuck. Opposition has halted them. Maybe you feel similar. There's something clearly that the Lord's called you to do, or called you to walk in, or called you to hope for. And as you're trying to walk in that, opposition keeps coming up, and you keep facing this pattern of you're trying to take initiative. You're trying to do the thing that the Lord called you to do. And all of a sudden you feel stuck because something has come against you, or something in you is trying to deter you, and you feel stuck, and the same decision sits in front of you. Will you resolve to continue, or will you retreat? And maybe you've been stuck at a standstill for a long time. And I think that this text is for you. So let me take a moment. Let's pray one more time, and let's jump in. And so Jesus, I have no doubt that in a room of this size, that there are people that know what you called them to, that desperately want to do it, but feel like every circumstance has come against them to stop them from being faithful in it. Would you, by your word, give them freedom today? It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Ezra chapter 5, starting in verse 1. Now, I'm just going to confess to you, if you were cheating ahead while I was talking, be like, let me see what this is all about. 2 chapters. I don't know if we're going to make it through. We're going to make it through. But you're reading through it, you're like, this is a bunch of letters back and forth about a building project. I get it. But I just think the Lord has something in it for us. So here's what it says. Ezra 5, verse 1. But when the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, began to build God's house in Jerusalem. The prophets of God were with them, helping them. At that time, Tattenai, the governor of the region west of the Euphrates River, and Shetha-Bozenai, and their colleagues came to the Jews and asked, "Who gave you the order to rebuild this temple and finish this structure?" They also asked them, "What are the names of the workers who are constructing this building?" But God was watching over the Jewish elders. These men wouldn't stop them until a report was sent to Darius so that they could receive written instructions about this matter. So here, even as we read this text, it feels a little bit different than what we heard last week. Last week, what happened is that the enemies of Judah showed up, and the enemies of Judah said, "Hey, first of all, can we help you?" And they were like, "No, you can't help us." They're like, "Okay, well, if we can't help you, we're going to start bribing people to make this more difficult for you." And then you jump forward something like 60 years, and as they jump forward, they see again another set of conflict with another people sending a letter to a different king saying, "Hey, you got to stop them from doing this." And then we see the third instance, which is about 20 years after that says, "Okay, now we're sending another letter to the king Artaxerxes, and we're going to make sure that it stops." And Artaxerxes was like, "Hey, yeah, we need to stop them from building these walls, because if they build these walls, they're not going to give us money anymore, and that's a problem for our royal bank account." But this is different. Because Tattenai and these guys show up and they say, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Who gave you the authority to do this? And who's in charge of the project? Let me have some of the names." And what we've seen the pattern before is, hey, we're going to slow down and stop. But what we see in verse 5 looks really, really different. Read it with me again. Verse 5 would say this: "But God was watching over the Jewish elders. These men wouldn't stop them until a report was sent to Darius." So they're like, "Hey, yeah, you can ask all the questions that you want, but we're going to keep working. You can investigate, you can find out people's names, you can do all the details, you can do all of your site inspections that you want to do, but we're not stopping until Darius stops us." Like, these are people who for 15 years didn't do any work. These were 15 years, they just kind of sat around and said, well, they said we can't do this, so we're not going to do this. And so what happened in them that all of a sudden they trying to do some work with their chest out saying, you won't have to stop us. And I actually think the answer is in verse 1. Verse 1 says, "But when the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem." And I think that's important because we actually spent some time several weeks ago walking through the book of Haggai, and that was intentional. So you would have a little bit of a double click when you see that name. Oh, this is what he said to them. And so the interesting thing is, if you read Haggai and Zechariah don't show up and say, "Hey guys, there have been some letters sent against you that says that you can't do this, but you should do it anyways." Haggai actually never speaks about what's going on with the Persian Empire. He never speaks about whether there are officials or governors that are pushing against them. What he says to them first is, you are saying in your own heart that it's not the right time to do this. You're instead building up your houses and putting your attention other places. Haggai seems to have very little interest in what's going on in their circumstances and has much more interest in what's going on inside of them. If you read Zechariah, and we intentionally didn't do the book of Zechariah for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think you want to do this series until 2026. But two, because if you read Zechariah, it's a bunch of wild visions. So if you've ever had a dream at night where you woke up in the morning and you're like, "Why did I have wings?" That's reading the book of Zechariah. Because it is these visions of him trying to see, both for Zerubbabel and Joshua, what does faithfulness look like, and how do you push the people towards faithfulness so that God can accomplish his purposes? And so both of them have these visions of, this is what it means for you to be faithful regardless of the circumstances around you. And you can see that there's something that's different between being given permission by the government and being given a call by the Lord. That there's something in them that they're convinced of, that God has said this, that he's spoken through the prophets, that we need to do this and the time is now to do this, and we shouldn't be waiting until the circumstances are right. And so there's a significant difference between I'm clear and convicted of what the Lord said I should do versus what I just have permission to do. And so then I wrote it this way: we must shift our focus from external circumstances to internal dynamics. Maybe you feel at a standstill today, and there may be lots of things around you that force that standstill. But my caution to you is to not just look at what's around you, but look at what's within you. Because what's been promised to you by the very precious promises of God is that there is the ability to withstand and overcome those circumstances. And so it's a shift from our external dynamic down to our internal dynamics. Our faithfulness is not determined by what the situation allows, but by the Lord who calls. Faithfulness will not be you picked the right moment to go. Doing the will of God is not like playing double dutch. Some of you don't know what double dutch is, but when I was a kid and we did things in recess that were moderately dangerous, like playing dodgeball and actually throwing at each other's heads, there's a game called double dutch. And you had two sets of jump ropes. And it wasn't like the nice, fancy workout jump ropes. It was the beaded jump ropes with like the little things that were this long. And if one of them hit you, you might have took some years off your life. And you had two girls who had no respect for height and no respect for persons that were swinging these things as fast as they possibly could. And the goal was to try and jump in and jump out without losing years off your life. And so they're swinging like this, and you just try and jump in. And you knew the kids that were good about it because they seemed like they had no stress, like they were going to walk into the thing. And you knew the kids who had never done it because they were like biting their nails, like next in line, freaking out. And the goal was, are you good enough? Are you smart enough? Is your timing right enough to jump into that thing at the right time? That's not how the will of God works. It's not have you figured out the cadence of the ropes and the cadence of the world and the cadence of the economy and the cadence of politics and you can jump in at the right time to do what he calls you to do. It's that he has called you, and that's where your faithfulness is found. I don't got time. I got to keep going. Ezra chapter 5, verse 6 would then say this. This is the text of the letter that Tattenai, the governor of the region west of the Euphrates River, and Shethar-Bozenai, and their colleagues, the officials in the region, sent to Darius. They sent him a report written as follows. To King Darius, all greetings. Or as I like to say, hey homie, how you doing? Let it be known to the king that we went to the house of the great God in the province of Judah. It is being built with cut stones, and its beams are being set in the walls. The work is being done diligently and succeeding through the people's efforts. So we questioned the elders and asked, who gave you the order to rebuild this temple and finish the structure? We also asked them for their names so that we could write down the names of their leaders for your information. Now, I want you to hear a shift in voice. This is still the letter from Tattenai and Shethar-Bozenai, or however you say his name. But they're telling Darius the reply from the people. This is the reply that they gave us. We are the servants of the God of the heavens and earth. And we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. But since our ancestors angered the God of the heavens, he handed them over to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, the Chaldeans, who destroyed the temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of King Cyrus of Babylon, he issued a decree to build the house of God. He also took from the temple in Babylon the gold and silver articles of God's house that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and carried them to the temple in Babylon. He released them from the temple in Babylon to a man named Sheshbazzar, the governor by appointment of King Cyrus. Cyrus told him, take these articles, put them in the temple in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its original site. Then this same Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundation of God's house in Jerusalem. It has been under construction from that time until now, but it has not been completed. So if it pleases the king, this is now back in Tattenai's voice, if it pleases the king, let a search of the royal archives in Babylon be conducted to see if it is true that a decree was issued by King Cyrus to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. Let the king's decision regarding this matter be sent to us. And so there's just a couple of things I want you to see here. One of those is, I want you to see where the concern sits for Tattenai and his colleagues. I think it's helpful as we look at verse 8. He talks about, let it be known to the king that we went to the house of the great God in the province of Judah. And then he begins to give some details. It's being built with cut stones. So they didn't just find some stuff, they're actually fashioning the stones that they're using. And its beams are being set in the walls. And so the way that this works is that they would set 3 layers of stones and they would set 1 layer of timber, and then they would drill into it to make sure that it was actually sturdy if an earthquake or something like that came. That's the reason why they're giving that level of definition. This work is being done diligently and succeeding through the people's efforts. So it's not just that they're building, it's that they're building well. Let me give you some friendly advice. I think sometimes we have to try and discern whether we are facing opposition or not. And there's something in this text that points to the people of God doing excellent work. And so let me just challenge you. If your supervisor is having conversations with you because you show up late from break all the time, that's not opposition, that's called professionalism. And I just want us to answer the question for ourselves, are we known for being excellent at what we do? That whether your job is a job in ministry or a job in something else, are we as the people of God being caught in doing things well enough that it grabs other people's attention? Or let me say it to you this way, I don't even have time for this morning, but I wish I had time to spend time in 1 Peter, because 1 Peter chapter 2, he starts rattling off things like, you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people who call forth the praises of him who brought you out of darkness into marvelous light. And then after saying those big words about who you are before God, then I wish I had time to tell you all the ink that he spends in saying to you, and so this is the way that you conduct yourselves. Like Jesus, you conduct yourself with a level of honor and a manner that when the world looks at you, all they can talk about is the things that are good about you. That when they want to bring charges against you, that they got to talk about the good things that you did. I wish I had time this morning to talk to you about the way that Peter says, and so when you go to work, those of you who are servants, honor your masters. For those of you who are part of the citizenship, honor the emperor, even though he's crazy. For those of you that are in marriage relationships, honor your husband, honor your wife. And then he would go on, just in case you didn't get it before, go ahead and let them talk about you. That when they disparage you, let them only have good things to say about what you did wrong. Is that true of the people of God right now? Or is there something in us that feels entitled that because we don't like the way that you lead or the way that you think or the thing that you stand for, that we give lesser effort because what they were complaining about was the excellence of the work, not the laziness of the people? I don't got time. Let me keep going. And then I just want to praise the Lord for the gift of self-awareness. We don't see in the scriptures self-awareness amongst people very often. In fact, a lot of times the way I read my Bible is when I read the Old Testament and I read about Israel, I'm like, I'm better than them, Lord. I also read that 1 Corinthians that way. I'm like, I'm not doing what they're doing. And so when they get it right, I want to give them credit for getting it right. And when you read verse 11 and 12, hear what they say is the start of their reply. We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, of the heavens and the earth. Like they know who they are in relation to God. They see themselves as servants. And if that's not a telltale sign, then see what they say in verse 12. But since our ancestors angered the God of the heavens, he handed them over to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed the temple and deported the people to Babylon. Hear what they're saying. This was our fault. And see the level of awareness that they have, that the Lord's actions weren't rejection, they were just loving discipline. That we understand, and so the reason that we're back to doing the work is because we serve him above all else. But not only do we serve him above all else, we're not going to make the same mistakes that the generations before us made. We're not going to turn our eyes, our affection, our attention to what's easy and what helps us to get along with the world around us, but instead we're going to enter into the faithful work that God called us to because he has the right to discipline us if we stray like they strayed. And then let's hear the response of Darius. Chapter 6, starting in verse 1, would say this. King Darius gave the order, and they searched in the library of Babylon and the archives. But it was in the fortress of Ecbatana in the province of Media that a scroll was found with this record written on it. So before we go on, you gotta feel the tension of that. Like they go to where it was supposed to be, and some intern in the mailroom put it somewhere else. And then you got to feel the tension of God has to move, because what would make Darius be like, oh, well, let's keep looking. Let's go to Ecbatana and see if we can find it there. And so somehow God's moving on their behalf to have them search far enough and deep enough and work hard enough. Like something's important happening here that they would care enough to go the extra mile to find it when it's not where it's supposed to be. Here's what it says. In the first year of King Cyrus, he issued a decree concerning the house of God in Jerusalem. Let the house be rebuilt as a place for offering sacrifices. Let its original foundation be retained, its height to be 90 feet and its width 90 feet, with 3 layers of cut stones and 1 of timber. That's what they described earlier. The cost is to be paid from the royal treasury. The gold and silver articles of God's house that Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and carried to Babylon must also be returned. They are to be brought to the temple in Jerusalem where they belong and put in the house of God. Now, I want you to now hear, this is now no longer the historical document of what Cyrus said. This is Darius's comment after having found that document. And so here's what he says. Therefore, you must stay away from that place, Tattenai, governor of the region west of the Euphrates, and Sheth-Bozenai, and your colleagues, the officials in the region. Now, I want to give you a clue in reading your Bible well. Anything that you see in close repetition in a small space is meant to tell you the importance of that thing. So watch this, starting in verse 7. Leave the construction of the house of God alone. Let the governor and the elders of the Jews rebuild the house of God on its original site. One time. I hereby issue a decree concerning what you are to do so that the elders of the Jews can rebuild the house of God. 2 times. The cost is to be paid in full to these men out of the royal revenues from the taxes of the region west of the Euphrates River. Number 3, so that the work will not stop. Whatever's needed, young bulls, rams, lambs for burnt offerings to the God of the God of the heavens, or wheat, salt, wine, and oil, as requested by the priest in Jerusalem. Let it be given to them every day without fail, so that they can offer sacrifices of pleasing aroma to the God of the heavens and pray for the life of the king and his son. So number 4, we want them to keep doing the thing that they're doing. And then verse 11. I also issue a decree concerning any man who interferes with this directive. Let a beam be torn from his house and raised up. He will be impaled on it. You need to calm down, Darius. And his house will be made into a garbage dump because of this offense. May the God who caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who dares to harm or interfere with this house of God in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have issued the decree. Let it be carried out diligently. Last week, Capenna kind of put a 3-level perspective in front of us. That there are going to be times when we interact with people who don't believe the same thing that we believe. And there's going to be a space for hospitality. There's going to be a space for cooperation. And then sometimes there's going to be a space to avoid compromise. And so looking at this text, what's so stunning to me is there's a level of cooperation here that's coming from Darius that only makes sense because it came from the Lord. Like, look at in just a few verses how intent Darius is to say, well, this work can't stop. Let them build, leave them alone, give them what they need, make sure that it happens. Darius is serious about this. And if you're not sure how serious he is, apparently he wants to impale people that get in the way. Darius is not playing games. He wants this to happen. But they didn't know that back in chapter 5 or verse 5. Verse 5, they had no idea how Darius was going to respond, but they said, hey, we're going to keep working until he stops us. So something in them had enough confidence because of what they've heard from God that we're going to do this thing unless we're stopped by the law of the government. And so they're like, we're going to keep pushing forward. And they faithfully step out on nothing, and Darius' support comes up under them. But it's clear that it's not just Darius' support, but it's the work of God in the heart of Darius to cause this to happen. So I just wrote it this way. There are times when we will not know the Lord's full support unless we step forward and trust first. Hear me. I want the Lord to give me all the details up front. I want him to tell me how he's going to work it out, what budget it's coming from, who's writing the check, and what day it's showing up in the mail. But there are times where he's like, no, you just got to trust me. Take a step. You just got to trust me. Take a step. And something in them was courageous enough and bold enough. And when they did, they would have never known this level of commitment from Darius, where Darius is like, I'm taking people out if they mess with you. And even bigger than that, let God unseat a king or a governor or somebody in a palace that would dare try and come against this. Which makes the next section interesting. 13 through 15 then says, then Tattenai, governor of the region west of the Euphrates River, Shethar-Bozenai, and their colleagues diligently carried out what Darius had decreed. So the Jewish elders continued successfully with building under the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah son of Iddo. They finished the building according to the command of God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and King Artaxerxes of Persia. This house was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. As I was studying this week, there was a guy that I was reading. He was like, just look at the loyalty of Tattenai and his colleagues to the words of Darius and how they faithfully and immediately completed the work that they were called to do so that Israel could complete the work that they were called to do. And I was like, you might have more degrees than I do, but I'm pretty sure that they read the letter that I read and they're like, if you stop them, I will impale you. But it's really clear that the Lord is at work in such a way that even these people who had this massive level of concern about the work that was being done, that they were willing to turn because of the work of what the Lord was doing through Darius to accomplish his purposes. Now, I'm sure some of you have a at-home DIY project of building something, but this speaks nothing to that. So what do we do with this? If our main idea is that renewal requires us to do more than expect opposition, it invites us to embrace it as one of God's favorite tools to mature us. How do we see that in this text, and how do we live that out? And so we've talked a lot about the construction of this book and the construction of these 3 books have us kind of jumping around in time. And so to speak to one of the greatest movies about jumping in time ever, I just want to share this thought about Back to the Future with you. Don't miss the profound spiritual connection between your current moment and the history of God's power amongst his people. Let me finish reading the chapter and help you to see that. Starting in verse 16 of chapter 6, it says this: Then the Israelites, including the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles, celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of God's house, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, and 400 lambs, as well as 12 male goats as a sin offering for all of Israel, one for each Israelite tribe. They also appointed the priests by their division and the Levites by their groups to the service of God in Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. The exiles observed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. All of the priests and Levites were ceremonially clean because they had purified themselves. They killed the Passover lamb for themselves, their priestly brothers, and all the exiles. The Israelites who had returned from exile ate it, together with all who had separated themselves from the uncleanness of the Gentiles of the land in order to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. They observed the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days with joy because the Lord had made them joyful, having changed the Assyrian king's attitude toward them, so that he supported them in the work of the house of the God of Israel. Now, here's what I want you to think about, just really briefly. Over and over again, as we've been reading through these 3 books, we keep seeing these dates and times and festivals show up. And I just want you to know that's not coincidental. It wasn't like, hey, we're building and we finished laying the foundation. It just so happens that we finished on the day that Solomon built the temple. I guess we should probably celebrate. It's not accidental that they were doing the work, and as they got to a certain point in the work, that they would look up and be like, hey, this is a time when we're supposed to sacrifice for our sin, and so we should do that right now. Like, those things aren't happening accidentally. Like, they know what's happening in the calendar. And so it's no accident that when they finished building the temple, that they decided to have the celebration at the moment of Passover. But let me ask the question, why is Passover significant for them? If you are familiar with the story of scriptures, then maybe I'm going to tell you some things that you already know. But if you're not familiar with the story of scriptures, I actually think it's really important that we examine why. Here's the story of the first Passover. In the book of Exodus, there's this moment where the people of God are beginning to grow in such numbers that the king of Egypt, called the Pharaoh, gets nervous and says, if they turn against us or they join another nation, they're going to overthrow us. We need to enslave them. And in the work of enslaving them, he doesn't just enslave them because they continue to grow and they continue to multiply. He gives a decree to 2 midwives and tells those 2 midwives, if there is a young man that's born, kill him. If there's a young woman that's born, leave it alone. And those 2 women say, we're not going to do that. And so they make up this lie that they say, hey, we try to get there, but you know what? Hebrew women get it done. They have these babies too quick. We can't get there. It's all over with. So then he sends out a decree into the entirety of the land and says that if you find a Hebrew boy that's been born, you have permission to kill the Hebrew boy. This is a level of genocide that's happening in the world. And in the midst of that, this young man named Moses is born. His mom throws him into a basket into water. His sister watches him float up the river, and he gets found by Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter raises him in the house of Egypt. And so if maybe you don't know the Bible, but you've watched The Prince of Egypt, which I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, has the greatest movie soundtrack of all time. And so as they raise him up, he begins to see his people being mistreated, gets angry and kills a taskmaster over his people. And after he kills the taskmaster over his people, he runs away thinking that first of all, somebody says to him, hey, are you gonna kill us like you killed the Egyptian taskmaster? Realizes he's found out, and then he runs away. From there, the Lord calls him to go back and declare for Pharaoh to let his people go. And then over the next several chapters, we begin to see the power of God being displayed over and over again to try and remind Pharaoh that he is no God at all, that God is truly God, and that he should let his people go. The final of those 10 plagues is what is called the Passover moment, where all of the Israelites were to kill a lamb and put the blood of the lamb over a doorpost, and so that the wrath of God would pass by their house, and doorposts that didn't have blood over it, that they were going to receive the loss of their firstborn child. And so this moment is when God flexes his power in such a way that Pharaoh says, I'm not messing with y'all no more. You can go. So think about what they're intentionally linking together. They're saying in our past, there was a moment when God changed the heart of a king in our favor, that we could be set free to be his people fully. In fact, what they told him initially when Moses shows up in his palace is, hey, would you let the people go 3 days journey into the wilderness so they can worship their God? And he's like, I'm not letting them do that. And now they're in this moment where they're trying to build this house of the Lord so that they can freely worship and give all the sacrifices to him, as if to say, now we're seeing God move in the same way, not through the power of wrath, but through the power of mercy to convince Darius to let us do what we're supposed to do. As if to link these two things together, that God's moving profoundly on the behalf of his people, and our moment is the same as that moment back in the day. Now let's jump back into the future, because there's another significant Passover moment. If you think about the night that Jesus was sitting with his disciples, if you're watching The Chosen right now, it was the latest episode. They went and found a room during Passover so they could sit down and have a meal. Some of you are like, don't ruin it for me. It's in the Bible. And so in the season of Passover, Jesus shows up and not only refers to a Passover lamb, but becomes that Passover lamb. And in becoming that Passover lamb, that the wrath of God has now moved past people who have received the mercy of Jesus' sacrifice over them. But here's what's interesting is when you read the New Testament, and the New Testament interprets that moment, the way Paul talks about it is they didn't understand that what looked like opposition and suffering and brokenness was actually the plan of God to accomplish something. Let me prove it. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 would say it this way. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, announcing the mystery of God to you, I did not come with brilliance of speech or wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear and in much trembling. My speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with the demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not be based on human wisdom, but on God's power. So here what he's saying. Hey, when I showed up to you in Corinth, I didn't have much to offer. I didn't look impressive. My argumentation wasn't brilliant. That I actually came to you with my fear and my weakness and my trembling. Like I came to you with I wasn't all that impressive at all. And that was God's plan. So that way you wouldn't anchor your hope in human wisdom, ingenuity, power, and systems, but instead that you would look past me towards God's power. And so it seems like he's saying, so we're not all that impressive. It must be God doing the work. But hear what he says next. We do, however, speak a wisdom among the mature. Remember our main idea that God's favorite method of maturing, or one of his favorite methods of maturing us, is opposition. But not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who come to nothing. On the contrary, we speak God's hidden wisdom in a mystery, a wisdom God predestined before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age knew this wisdom, because if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So he's building this thought process of the wisdom of God is really different than the wisdom of our world. The system of our world is accumulating power and accumulating agency and accumulating strength, but the wisdom of God seems to lean into suffering and opposition and embrace it to cultivate something in people. And then he kind of capstones his thought and he says this: if the rulers of this world knew what was happening with the cross, they would have left him alone. I actually think if you were going to read Exodus 1 through 15, the way you can summarize it is, Pharaoh, you better leave them alone. And I wonder if this is a back to the future moment where our current moment links back to the history of God's people, that somehow he profoundly, through suffering and brokenness and opposition, moves in such a way to show his people his power in a way that sets them free. So there's something going on that if the world around us knew what God was trying to do in us, they would leave us alone. That if they knew that talking about you was going to get you on your knees, they would have left you alone. That if they knew that taking your job was going to make you more generous, that they would have left you alone. If they knew that making you feel powerless and small would allow you to lean into the power of Spirit, they would have left you alone. That there's something that the Spirit of God is doing amongst the people of God, that when opposition shows up, that it stirs this maturity of the wisdom of those who follow Jesus that can't be found in a world system. And so if you're sitting in a standstill that's caused by opposition, embrace it. If you're sitting in a moment where it feels like everything around you is colliding against you to keep you from being faithful to God, embrace it. Because if the ruler of this age knew better, he would leave you alone. If he knew that because you have trusted Jesus, that the Spirit of God, which is the down payment of new creation, was on the inside of you, he wouldn't mess with you. If he knew that squeezing you was going to cause that to come out, he'd leave you alone. And so my prayer for you is that you would be like the leaders and the workers in Ezra 5 and 6, that they're so convinced of what God has called them to, that this time they're not stopping the work no matter what opposition comes against them. And that the Lord would send a level of cooperation that they couldn't imagine because they were willing to step out in faith and believe him. But more than that you'd see your story as part of the bigger story, that God moves amongst his people oftentimes in the most difficult circumstances. I've told you before, I don't preach a lot of messages. I really only got 3 of them: the kingdom, suffering, and the beauty of Christ in the midst of suffering. I really only got 2. And this one hits both. We sang it earlier, that the king still sits on his throne. That God is the God above all kings. And he doesn't need Darius's cooperation and approval. This is like parent bringing your kid to work day. He just lets him come along. That he is not beholden to Cyrus or Darius or Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes, that he's accomplishing his purposes. And then in the middle of the suffering that they were experiencing, the opposition that they were facing, the conflict that they were dealing with, that God was doing something to mature them, not just accomplish the task. May he do the same with us. Let's pray. So Jesus, I pray this morning that somebody would find freedom. Because here is often our response to opposition and conflict and suffering. Get me out of this. But what if, in the midst of our fear and our weakness and our trembling, that you're giving us this wisdom and maturity that can only be shaped through embracing and trusting you in the midst of a trial? So would you do that work in us? Would you do that work in me, where the moments where I want to fast forward past the tough parts and get to the good parts? Would you allow me to embrace what you are doing in the moment, what you're growing in me, what you're showing me? That you, in history, whether that's through the Exodus or through the sacrifice of your son, often use these moments of opposition to convince us of your power and cause us to trust you. Would you do it again? Maybe there's somebody under the sound of my voice that is battling for their faith right now. And it feels like every time they try and take a step towards you, Jesus, a million things come against them. But would they understand that in the midst of that opposition that you want to show them your favor, your power, your mercy, your grace, and would you give them the courage to continue to step forward and watch you step under them and support them? Not because you're coming in at the last minute, you've always been there, but they wouldn't have known if they didn't take that step. Support them, surround them, embolden them to walk in the calling that you've given them. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.